Novara Media have heard rumblings from inside The Guardian over an appointment announced internally. In an email leaked to us, Editor-in-Chief Catherine Viner writes, "I'm pleased to announce that M&A Sinmaz is joining The Guardian soon from the Daily Mail as senior reporter. Please join me in congratulating her." That The Guardian is employing a Daily Mail journalist might already raise eyebrows. They are two papers which have very different values. But these things do happen. I'm sure there are good journalists who start at the Mail because that was a job that was going at the time. They end up at a better paper. But a quick search suggests Sinmaz isn't a rare progressive Daily Mail journalist. Her articles include this, following the murder of MP Joe Cox. The headline asks, "Did neo-Nazi murder Joe over fear he'd lose council house he grew up in? Terrorist thought property could end up being occupied by an immigrant family and the MP wouldn't help him." Her co-author in that piece, Chris Greenwood, is now head of media at the Metropolitan Police. In 2018, Sinmaz broke this story: Corbyn's reef at graves of Munich terrorists. Now, I imagine you'll remember this story. It was a very big deal, and it was a hit job based on the fact that in 2014, Corbyn laid a reef at a memorial in Tunisia. Corbyn was attending an event in honour of those who were killed in a 1985 Israeli airstrike on the PLO headquarters in Tunis. Now, some PLO members were involved in terrorism, as is the case with many liberation movements. But the PLO were also the internationally recognised representatives of the Palestinian people. That was recognised by the UN, for example. For his part, Corbyn has always denied any involvement in memorialising anyone involved in terrorism, and the BBC reported at the time that no photographs exist of him laying a wreath at those particular graves. Nonetheless, of course, the damage was done. The article was regularly cited as proof of Corbyn's terrorist sympathies and of his supposed anti-Semitism. Again, you might say, Sinmaz was employed by the Mail. She could have just been assigned this piece, and perhaps she now regrets writing this hit job on a Labour leader. Well, this is Sinmaz's Twitter header. As you can see, far from having simply had to do a dirty job at the Mail, she's obviously quite proud of that story. Interestingly, at The Guardian, she'll be joining another Daily Mail alumna, Faye Schlesinger. Schlesinger worked as a news reporter at the Daily Mail from 2008 to 2011. She was appointed head of national news at The Guardian in 2020. A source at The Guardian tells us that there is consternation across the newspaper about hiring Sinmaz, with people viewing the decision as undermining their values as an organisation. All of this information was broken by my colleagues Rivka Brown and Aaron Bastani, who have published an article about this on novaramedia.com. They go into this hire and what it says about The Guardian's new direction under editor Catherine Viner in some detail. And Rivka joins me now to tell us more. Thank you for joining me tonight, Rivka. Great piece. Can I start by asking you, what's this about? In your piece, you say there is one impression that sort of hiring people from the Daily Mail is just that The Guardian wants to write more punchy tabloid-style pieces. The other interpretation is that this is about a swing to the right, away from its supposedly left liberal values. Which one is it?
Well, I think it's both. The Guardian, in terms of its swing away from the liberal left, Sinmaz could as easily have been a Guardian reporter when she was writing stories about Jeremy Corbyn. We know very well that throughout Corbyn's tenure, there were a lot of very personal stories about Jeremy Corbyn and very few about his kind of policy proposals. In fact, there was a 2018 study by the Media Reform Coalition that suggested that Jeremy Corbyn was the subject of more, or in fact, The Guardian printed more falsehoods and more incorrect stories around the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which formed a key part of the Labour anti-Semitism crisis, than the Daily Mail had. And so in terms of kind of swing away from left liberal values or kind of commitment to truth, I don't think it's anything particularly new. I do think, though, it is new that they are hiring a number of journalists with that kind of more, as I describe in the report, kind of feisty, fiery, spiky, belligerent style of news gathering and news management. That's a reflection of a concern, I think, that's been felt by Guardian managers for a while, that the newsroom is too kind of nice and genteel and polite and doesn't go after stories in the same kind of aggressive way that other Fleet Street outlets do. And that, I think, goes hand in hand with Catherine Viner's anxiety, which we talk about in the report, about being seen as respectable, both to the kind of politicians and political class, but also to the rest of Fleet Street and the kind of journalistic class. And so there is an attempt to emulate and to go after the kind of stories as well as the kind of style of other mainstream outlets. One journalist at the paper described to me that once upon a time, The Guardian was relatively happy to plough its own furrow, to do its own thing. But now it seems to be kind of playing a game of catch up with a lot of the rest of Fleet Street, basically. And I think Sinmaz's appointment, as well as Schlesinger's, is a reflection of that anxiety and inadequacy, that kind of inferiority complex.
Your piece also had some interesting insight into Kath Weiner's, I suppose, desire to be liked by Keir Starmer. Could you talk about that a bit?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think The Guardian, has had a really hard time. It's not since 2007, really, that it's had a leader, whether of the opposition or of the government, that it could really get behind. It's just been a string of either boring Labour leaders or Tories. And obviously, I think Corbyn really fell into the former camp. I don't really think their objection to him was hugely moral. I think it was mainly that he just wasn't as sexy as Tony Blair. And so I think, they've been winging for a while, and then Keir Starmer comes along and he'll kind of do. They've decided that this is the horse that they're going to back. And as I say in the report, I've heard tell that Catherine Weiner felt personally quite spurned by failing to receive an invite to a dinner party with Keir Starmer. And so, they are trying to ingratiate themselves with the Labour leader because they believe, possibly rightly, given the polling at the moment, that he will be the next prime minister of this country, and they want to back a winning horse for once. But I think also this is a reflection of something we touch on in the report too, which is a shifting way in which The Guardian conceives of its mission as a paper, away from the idea of the paper as a vehicle for informing its readers and directed primarily at its readers, at ordinary people, and towards a kind of bastion of influence among the chattering classes. It wants to be read. Catherine Weiner wants The Guardian to be read in the tea rooms of the Houses of Commons rather than in people's living rooms or on their phones or whatever. I mean, I'm sure technically she wants both, but it's a kind of prioritization, I suppose, and winning the kind of hearts and minds of people that matter, of influencers, of being agenda setting, is part of that.
And I want to ask you, I suppose, about some of the conversations you had with people inside The Guardian. I know you spoke to lots of people for this piece, because I would imagine that lots of people, join that paper because they want to do that hard-hitting investigative journalism that The Guardian used to be known for, pieces which were critical of British foreign policy, for example. Are people quite despondent that that doesn't seem to be the paper they've joined?
The overwhelming feeling that I got from people that I spoke to there, people that were still there and people that had left, was just a sense of, this is so bloody boring. Like, I'm pitching stories that are really interesting and getting absolutely nowhere because they won't appeal to the mainstream, according to my editor. Who's the mainstream? And I do really think that, the 2016 disbanding of the investigative unit by Kath Weiner about a year after she started as editor-in-chief set a bit of a tone for this. She did then reform it, but it's nothing like it was before. This is the investigative unit that broke the Snowden stories in 2013, that was being raided by GCHQ. It's impossible to imagine something like that happening now. And work that is done in that vein, like the Panama Papers, is done in a kind of coalition or a consortium with other journalistic outlets. And so, the idea of The Guardian being a spearhead and a kind of pioneer of that kind of hard-hitting, dangerous and challenging journalism is really difficult to imagine nowadays. And I think it's a great shame. And there's a lot of investigative journalistic talent which is really lost on The Guardian, and a lot of people have left.